right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Poppy DeBoer. I'm an LPC, and this is Tools for Healing Sexual Trauma. I'm going to start out just saying a little bit about me and my background, because how often do we get to talk about ourselves? So my journey with the healing arts started back in 2000, doing deep tissue massage, working with people to release trauma, and then wasn't for another 15 years till I entered or got into the counseling field here in Asheville at Lenore Ryan University. And that history of massage therapy really influences my perspective on doing counseling. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. In between, just for interest, I've staffed and managed the Hostel in the Forest down in Brunswick, Georgia. It's a sweet little place. If you don't know about it, you should check it out. Go for $25 a night, sleep in a treehouse, swim in a lake, hang out with hippies. Pretty awesome. And then, I don't know if you all know the world-famous artist Alex Gray. I helped him start an art retreat center in upstate New York, which was pretty fun and interesting use of people skills. So just a little bragging on me. And clinical background, I worked for 5 years at Trinity Place, which is a crisis shelter for runaway and homeless kids and foster care kids who are in between placements. Not so much doing counseling, more case management, but you're spending all day with these kids. And so, just developing that rapport, trying to help them as best you can, just being in their lives for a few weeks at a time. I interned with Our Voice in grad school, offering counseling, free counseling to survivors of sexual trauma and to their loved ones. And then we loved each other so much that they hired me when I graduated. And I've been working for them as a contract counselor ever since. When I graduated, I also started my private practice, the Agency of Change, to supplement the contract work. Just basically working with folks who feel stuck, which most of our clients do, and figuring out how to get them moving. So here's how I look at things. My basic clinical approach, it's all about the therapeutic relationship, especially when we're talking sexual trauma, right? If someone is coming into the room and they've been wounded in one of the worst ways that we as humans can wound each other. And so it's really, really important to develop a safe space, to be a person of trust, of empathy, of warmth, of kindness, of respect. In my opinion, that is imperative for working with folks who have been sexually traumatized. My work is primarily somatic. Somatic means of the body. And so, for example, if someone says to me, I feel anxious, my next question is, well, how do you know you feel anxious? Where is that in your body? And helping folks to get in touch with what these sensations are. That's what emotions and feelings are. They're sensations in our bodies. And so the more we can get in touch with those, the more autonomy we can have as far as our own life experience and our healing. It's also experiential, an experience of our feelings, an experience of our thoughts, an experience of our behaviors. I feel like if we just sit and talk with sexual trauma survivors, we're not getting at the trauma. We're just getting at this part of the brain. And we'll get into that a little bit more down the road. I primarily draw from acceptance and commitment therapy. This posits that most of our psychological suffering arises from either experiential avoidance, avoiding thoughts, avoiding feelings, avoiding external circumstances, or from what they call fusion, which is being so locked into our thoughts, feelings, experiences, we can't get any distance from them. And so what we aim to do through ACT is aim for psychological flexibility, finding that middle ground between avoidance and fusion where we are with our experiences, they don't dominate us, and we're not trying to shove them under the table. Okay? So these pieces are going to inform the approach today during the workshop. Any questions so far about any of what I've presented? All right. So just a little informed consent for our workshop today. We're going to be talking about some heavy stuff, okay? Not easy to talk about. So this is the opportunity. This is the point in the workshop. If I say shields up, and you know what I mean, it's time to go shields up, okay? Please take care of yourself. If you need to take a break, step outside, use the bathroom. Please don't worry about interrupting. Just take care of you. Do what you need to do. I do want to acknowledge being up here in the front. I'm a white dude. I'm cisgender, which means it's never I've never wondered, like, why am I in this male body? Which bathroom do I really go in? Okay? I'm male, and so there's a certain amount of privilege with that, right? Standing at the front of the room, I'm directing the flow. And so I just want to ask y'all's permission, if we go off in the weeds or one of the boundaries that we'll get to, we start to edge up against it. If I just have your permission to direct the flow of this workshop and steer us where we need to go. Is that all right? Do I have y'all's permission? Okay, thank you. One of the main boundaries here in the workshop is no trauma stories, please. We all have clients. We could share some really terrible, grisly stories. This is not the space for that, okay? We're already flirting with a pretty heavy topic, and I would prefer that we don't jump in the deep end of the pool, sharing any client stories or any personal stories of trauma. So y'all willing to agree to that? Great, thank you. Let's see. So we will be doing a lot of experiential exercises. You're welcome to participate or not as you please. There will be some meditations, etc., chances to share. We're not going to be touching each other or interacting with each other in any of those ways. I think on the evaluation form, there's a part for group exercises. We're not going to do any group exercises today. So please participate as you will. The intention today is to share tools and skills for y'all for when you work with folks who have sexual trauma, or if there are any survivors here also, take these tools home and use them. Okay. Here is an overview of everything we're going to talk about today. All right. First, we're going to hit some facts and statistics. All right. This is the heaviest, hardest part of the workshop. Okay. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the neurophysiology of trauma. So this is part of my lens also, that trauma hits us in the emotional and what they call reptilian parts of the brain that do not use words to communicate. Okay? So we're going to look at how that happens, and then we're going to do a lot of experiences that can address those, a lot of exercises that can address those parts of the brain. We're going to talk about some basic common areas that survivors tend to struggle. All right. Emotional dysregulation is one of the biggest ones, because I can't regulate my emotions between depression, anxiety. Shame is one of the biggest ones that survivors have trouble regulating. And then boundaries is number 3. So those are the 3 probably most common areas I work with survivors. We're going to do some breath and body exercises. We're going to do some mindfulness exercises, some somatic exercises, just straight body. We'll visit some cognitive tools, because those are important too. And then at the end, we'll have some wrap-up discussion. Please interrupt if you have a question, if you have a disagreement. I'm 3 years deep in the counseling field. There are folks here with far more experience than I have. So if you want to add to the discussion, please do. Again, it's that thing. I'm standing up here in front of the room, but that doesn't mean that I'm necessarily the authority or the person who knows the most in the room, okay? And the more you all share and talk and ask questions, then the less tiring it is for all of us to just be in this room all afternoon, okay? Any questions about anything so far? Comments, suggestions? Okay, so shields up, here we go. And I don't like to just read the PowerPoint. I trust that you all can read. I might pick out a few things here. This first statistic, 1 in 6 men, that's guys who actually report that something happened, okay? And us cisgender dudes don't tend to talk so much about sexual trauma. So the statistics are probably much higher than 1 in 6. And that statistic comes from a wide range of studies. It's pretty consistent. It comes from, reports to doctors, surveys on college campuses, etc. What else here? I want to draw your attention to the last statistic. 1 in 2 trans folks report some form of sexual assault or sexual abuse. And this is often they're targeted for being trans. It's even worse. So we're talking hate crimes, okay? So it's super prevalent in our society. Some more stats, and this comes from reports to law enforcement, okay? This comes from the National Center for Juvenile Justice. So most common age for females is 14, for those under 18 who are assaulted, okay? Most common age for males is 4 years old, okay? So there's probably also a lot of sexual abuse that is repressed, that is fragmented, and people acting out of trauma and not even knowing why they're doing so, okay? Once someone's been victimized, the chances are much higher they're going to be re-victimized. Wide range of statistics on this one, anywhere from double to 14 times as likely to be victimized again. There's some pretty straight stats for men, 6 times as likely. So 4 years old, somebody, if they get you, 6 times as likely somebody's going to get you again. Okay? This is a piece of of how people think about it and how they report. All right? So this comes from documented histories of sexual abuse by social service agencies. All right? That means there's no question that it happened. This stuff is documented. This stuff was observed. All right? Only 16% of those men consider themselves to have had some form of sexual abuse. Okay? So that again speaks to that low rate, and that speaks to that tendency for us cis dudes to not really talk about it. Okay? So I kind of see this as the great beast in our society, is sexual abuse and sexual trauma. All right? It's not talked about, impacts everyday life, impacts happiness, impacts our success, and probably a large percentage of y'all's clientele, whether you know it or not, have been sexually traumatized in some way. Okay? Now, when we think rape or we think sexual abuse, we often think of the creepy, shadowy stranger, which is minimally who it is. All right? First, some stats for children and teens up here, only 7% strangers. For boys, extrafamilial means folks outside the family, most often are the perpetrators. For girls, intrafamilial, someone in the family, is most often the perpetrator. All right? And then statistics differ a little bit for adults. 21%, it's a stranger. But what we see here is most often we're looking at family members, acquaintances, and for adults, current or former partners. Okay? So it most often comes from someone that the survivor knows to some degree. This is an important term to know if you don't know it. It's called grooming. And this is the process of the perpetrator grooming or preparing the child or the adolescent for sexual abuse. Okay? Because most often they know the child. They lavish attention on them, give gifts, often use pornography as a way to kind of introduce the kid to the potential. And the grooming is what can make sexual trauma so confusing, especially when it happens to kids. It is rare that I have a client sitting in the room with me who feels super clear that this was not my fault. I didn't have anything to do with this. I didn't invite this. I didn't want this. Rare. Most of my clients struggle with, somehow this was my fault. Why did I keep going back to my coach's house? You know, I must have wanted this in some way, or somehow I brought this upon myself. That's what grooming does, all right? And so that's why it's important to know it as a term, to be able to introduce it to our clients so that they can understand why it is so confusing. And here at the bottom are just some of the ways that perps use to groom children and adolescents for sexual abuse. Sunshine, rainbows. We're almost through. We're almost through this section. A few perpetration statistics, because people usually ask, what about perpetrators? What about the stats there? I don't really focus on perpetrators. I've worked with a few, but I tend to work with survivors. So let's see. I am going to read some of these. So for victims under the age of 11, 40% of offenders in those cases are juveniles. Right? So juveniles play a huge role in sexual perpetration for children under 11. 3 of 10 report multiple child victims. And that's just the ones who are willing to admit it. Okay? So many of them are repeat offenders. All right? Sibling sexual abuse, this was a surprise to me. 5 times higher than parent-child abuse. Because most often, in the room with folks, it was dad or it was mom. Less often was it brother or sister. But those stats are a lot higher than I see in the room. So I feel like it's worth sharing to help round out the picture. And folks often ask this, so I'll just spit it out. I finally looked at stats on this. So one of the biggest myths that survivors face, one of the biggest fears that they face is, because this happened to me, does that mean that I'm going to do it to someone else? Am I somehow cursed, or am I somehow fated that I'm going to do this to someone else? One of their worst fears. It's horrible. Okay, not going to share that story. That's terrible. So this is one of the most common fears, and they are always relieved to know that statistics show that most survivors do not go on and perpetrate, okay? Huge, significant percentage do not go on and perpetrate. Perpetrators are twice as likely to have been abused as your average person, okay? So it is a component of perpetration, but it is not a cause of perpetration. Okay, is that clear? Great. So clients are relieved to know that, this demon isn't going to take me over and I'm not going to somehow go do this to other people. These statistics are shocking and concerning. I've even provided the grad school style citation for anybody who would like to look it up. Female perpetration is huge. Okay? Huge. We don't really talk about it in our society. Or if we do, we say, oh, he was just getting lucky. Ooh, a high school teacher. Rare. Not cool. Second statistic, 90% of incarcerated juveniles report a female perpetrator, and that's guards or other inmates. Okay? 90%.
Is that both genders? What gender?
This is both genders of juveniles. Yep. Yeah, thank you for the question. So, check out this study if you want to learn more. I feel like this is another big shadow piece for us, especially as clinicians. We need to be careful not to minimize sexual abuse by females. Okay? Another stat just to throw out there that's not there, male perps tend to choose one gender and abuse that gender. Female perps tend to just go for anybody, any gender. Okay, almost there. Mental health outcomes. This comes from rain.org, which is a great resource. I think I'll list it again at the end. As you can see, survivors are 26 times more likely to abuse drugs. I can think of 1 or 2 clients in 3+ years of doing this clinical work who did not struggle with substance abuse. Okay, that's a huge piece of it, and I think it's a piece of that nervous system regulation that we'll get into. Okay? All right. How are we doing? That was the hard part. We're going to get into the rainbows and the sunshine and the exercises and stuff in a couple minutes. Any reflections, thoughts, questions on anything that we've covered, even if it's just a, wow, that was really intense? Project Runway fans? All right, there we go. There's a little... All right, so here we go. We're going to get into some neurophysiology, and in a little bit we're going to get into some exercises. Normally this is about a 4-hour workshop. We're going to try to nudge it into 3 hours. We are going to take a 15-minute break at some point, and then we'll try to wrap up, I believe, by 4:15. So the triune brain, all right, basic brain development. If you believe in evolution, this is partially an evolutionary theory. First, what develops is what they call the reptilian brain, all right? It's this part way in the back. This part of our brain governs heart beating, breathing, sweating, okay? And is also wired into the fight-flight response, okay? Very, very basic level of consciousness. The mammalian brain, part 2 in here, is the next to develop. So this part is where our emotions are generated out of. It's where we store habits and memory, which is nonverbal. Okay, it's where sexy time comes from, and it's also the attachment center, the part where we form our attachment relationships from. Okay, the prefrontal cortex, the last part of our brain, the biggest one up there. This is what differentiates us from mammals. It's rational and logical thinking. It's abstract thought. It's projecting ourselves into the future. It's visiting the past. This is the only part of our brain that thinks in words. Okay? Trauma impacts us in the whole brain, but particularly in the mammalian and the reptilian brain, right? Fight or flight spot, emotional spot, boom.